and his income as a doctor. He was very wealthy. And so it is suspected that maybe it was his money or his accomplishments that made so many women attracted to him, because he actually had a reputation of being an absolute ladies' man. And at the time that this story takes place, in March of 1980, this doctor had left a string of lovers in his wake, and one of those women was the principal of a prestigious school for girls in Washington, D.C., and her name was Jean Harris. So Jean Harris was born Jean Struven in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1923. Her mother was a religious fanatic who followed the fringe Christian Scientist movement, and her father, Albert, was a talented engineer who was plagued by and really struggled with bipolar disorder and anger management issues. As you might imagine, this did not create the most supportive, nurturing home environment for Jean to grow up in. But nonetheless, Jean persevered, and she was an outstanding student who went on to attend Smith College, which is a private liberal arts school for women in Northampton, Massachusetts. Jean ends up getting a degree in economics from this university, and shortly after graduation, she gets married to a very handsome Navy veteran named Jim Harris. The couple ends up settling in a very comfortable home in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and ended up having 2 sons over the next 2 years. However, by 1965, their marriage would end up failing, and that put Miss Jean back on the market and back into the dating scene. Now, she was described as a pretty attractive woman overall, so it was not a surprise when she caught the eye of Dr. Hermann Darnauer when their paths crossed. Now, Herman was Brooklyn born and bred. He was an intelligent child. He graduated at the top of his class and clearly went on to study medicine, eventually becoming a cardiologist in the Scarsdale and White Plain areas of New York. Around this time for him, World War II intervenes, and he was co-opted into the United States Army Medical Corps, where he would rise to the rank of major. After the war came to an end, he ends up establishing the Scarsdale Medical Center, and soon became very well known for his unique approach to treating coronary disease. Dr. Tarnower was a strong proponent of the idea that food is medicine, and he really emphasized this philosophy in his teaching and with his patients. And at this time, that idea was not very commonplace. That is something that is discussed a lot now, and your diet is really important to your health. But back in that time, this was actually a very groundbreaking opinion in the medical community. When Herman was away from his invitations to these parties were highly coveted among New York City's upper echelons. Now, Tarnower was also the quintessential bachelor. He was a predatory womanizer with a love them and leave them attitude. It was therefore a surprise to everyone shortly after meeting Jean Harris that he asked her to marry him. Jean ends up saying no and declining his marriage proposal, citing the fact that it would mean uprooting her sons from school to be with him in New York City. However, she did suggest that she might be more amenable to this if he popped the question again at the end of the academic year, when a move would be less disruptive for her sons. But Darnauer didn't really like that idea. He didn't want to wait around for this to happen, so he ends up moving on from Jean. In fact, he even suggested that they maintain an open relationship and see other people. So, really don't think that this man loved her all that much if he wasn't really willing to wait around, especially when sweet Jean was making the right decision by her children. So, now from Jean's perspective, she did not like this idea, so she never did take his advice about maintaining this open relationship. She ends up remaining devoted to him for the next 14 years, while he continued to see, date, and sleep with other women. And as you can imagine, this very much played with her emotions, and she didn't like it. But she stayed with him because she believed that any affair he embarked on was short-term, and that at the end of the day, he always would return to her. So I guess in her mind, she had him for 14 years and still counting at this time. And he never got rid of her in that sense. He kept her around. And so these other women were just flings, I suppose, is what she's thinking here. And for the first, I guess, 10 years or so of this arrangement, that was essentially true. But then a very attractive medical assistant by the name of Lynn Triforos comes into his life at the medical clinic that he established. Tarnower immediately sets about seducing her and soon gets her in his bed. However, this was no short-term fling. He seemed genuinely smitten about Lynn, and what really upset Jean about Lynn in particular, in comparison to the other women that he had been dating and sleeping with, was that Lynn was 20 years younger, and that all of Dr. Tarnower's friends liked her. can imagine, was to bring this school back to its former glory. However, that would prove to be far too complicated for Jean, who is now Principal Harris. After failing to make really any positive changes or have really much success with bringing this school back to its glory, her position was in serious jeopardy, and by 1979, the Board of Trustees was discussing terminating her contract, which was probably a big blow for her. And so, not only was her academic life completely, at risk of falling apart, so was her personal life. Now, as you can imagine, a love war completely broke out between Jean, Lynn, this new medical assistant, and Dr. Tarnower. The two women frequently exchanged nasty, insulting, harassing phone calls. They even went so far as to destroy or damage any property belonging to the other that was left behind at Tarnower's home, which they both apparently frequently visited. On one occasion in particular, Jean arrived for a weekend visit and found her favorite dress smeared with feces. Her response to this was to make a series of late-night calls to Lynn, keeping them up for over a month. And if you think about it, that kind of behavior is not only exhausting to receive, it's exhausting to be the one actively participating in. And so this really caused Jean to sink into a very deep depression, and it would go deeper and deeper over time. And this required her to rely heavily on methamphetamines that Dr. Darnauer actually prescribed for her. And with all of this combined, everything going on in her life, she becomes suicidal and starts to have suicidal ideation. In March of 1980, on the 7th day of the month, the incident that would finally push Jean over the edge came to be. When the dean of the Madeira school carried out a dormitory inspection, they found marijuana paraphernalia in the rooms of 4 students. Jean was informed and acted decisively by expelling the girls, which was completely in line with this goal to restore the school's reputation. However, she thought she was doing the right thing and never could have imagined the backlash that would come from this decision. So first, she found herself confronted by very angry parents because she expelled these girls. Then she is called in by the board and basically told that she's overreacting to expel the girls. And then finally the entire student body came out in protest against her, and there was like this movement within the school system saying that she wasn't treating the Madeira 4 fairly. And even one of Jean's favorite students ends up condemning her for these expulsions and writes a letter of complaint. So, all of that to say, this was the last straw for Jean's extremely fragile emotional state. And so the following day, she ends up purchasing wrote a long, kind of drawn out letter to Dr. Tarnower, basically chronicling the many wrongs she felt had been inflicted on her during their time together. She criticizes Lynn Triforos, describing her in very unflattering terms and accusing her of ruining her clothing and stealing much of her jewelry. And in this same letter, she admits that she was not without blame and that she also destroyed some of Lynn's property, which I suppose is good that she owned her part in this whole love triangle affair madness. And the end of the letter basically has a plea for Tarnower to treat her better. But as soon as the envelope dropped in the slot of his house, she regretted sending it. After stressing over this for the rest of the week, she phoned him on Monday, May 10th, asking him not to read the letter and requested that he just destroy it unopened. And he agreed to do so, and then acceded to another request, which was to meet with her later that day. That meeting would require Jean to make a 5-hour drive, and so she leaves right away. But she brings that newly acquired revolver with her now. According to later testimony, Jean made this trip that day with only one purpose in mind. She wanted to see the man she so deeply loved, Dr. Darnauer, one last time before committing suicide. She planned to row out to a small island on a pond or near a pond on Tarnower's property, a location that she had described as her favorite place and one of these places she had spent quite a bit of time at within the last 15 years or so. And it was there that she felt like that would be the place to end her life. But things did not turn out that way. Upon arriving at the estate, Jean found Tarnower in a particularly uncaring mood. He really didn't want to have much of a conversation and essentially ignored her begging to sit down and discuss their relationship. Then Jean ends up coming across some of Lynn's things at the doctor's home, and it completely sent her into a rage. She started throwing objects around the room, which basically this elicited a response from Tarnower. She couldn't get him just to civilly have a conversation, so when she started throwing things, he engaged with her. So he was screaming at her, telling her that she was crazy and she needed to get out of that house and to leave. And then he walked across and tried to force her from the room. And during this altercation, he ends up slapping her in the face. And that was the moment that she pulls out the gun that she brought with her. According to Jean, she had only drawn the weapon to fulfill her intention of killing herself. But Dr. Tarnower tried to wrestle the gun from her, and it accidentally discharges 5 separate times. He was herself. But when she pulled the trigger, it clicked on an empty chamber. She had used up all of the bullets she had in that revolver by shooting her lover. And by the time police and paramedics arrived on the scene, Dr. Tarnower was already dead. So in December of 1980, the trial of Jean Harris began at the Westchester County Court. It would last around 3 months and become a national obsession at this time, and it was covered by the media from West Coast to East Coast. Jean entered with a not guilty plea and cited temporary insanity, and she continued to insist that this shooting had been accidental all along. But as you may already know and imagine here, the evidence really did not support that claim. Forensic experts argued that Dr. Tarnower had been asleep when the first shot was fired. He had then put up his hand in a futile attempt to protect himself and had suffered a defensive wound before Jean pumped 3 more bullets into his body. And so, forensic experts conclude that there is no way that this was an accidental shooting, but in fact it was an assassination. Now, also entered into evidence was the 10-page letter that Harris had written to him when she was planning her suicide. This one that she had asked him to destroy, but it turns out it was never destroyed. And so it was read out loud in court, and it was a shocking letter to the jury, showing a very unexpected side to Jean's character. In the letter, she described Lynn Triforos in terms that would have made a sailor blush. And of course, the media just took it and ran with it. It became a media frenzy. I mean, it already was, but it was this kind of information that they wanted to pump out to viewers. The idea that a prim and proper school principal was capable of such vulgarity is really kind of what news networks just eat up. And it also served her no good in trial. And so, after 8 days of deliberating, the jury returns a guilty verdict to second-degree murder. Jean was subsequently sentenced to 15 years to life and confined at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in Westchester County, New York. Now, Jean would prove to be a model prisoner, setting up a program to help inmates further their education, and also started a nursery for babies born to convicted mothers in prison. And during that time, she worked on several appeals, but all of them were rejected. She was eventually released 12 years later in 1992 on the grounds of ill health after she suffered 2 separate heart attacks. One of the first things she did after gaining her freedom was to visit Dr. Darnauer's grave at Mount Hope Cemetery in Hastings-on-Hudson. And over the next several years, she would visit several more times. Now, she didn't end up dying herself until December which was quite a long time after she was released from prison. So I'm kind of surprised that somehow she got away with this early release based off of poor health, given that she lived so much longer. But she ends up dying of natural causes on December 23rd of 2012 at the age of 89. That concludes the case of Dr. Hermann Darnauer. And, you know, cases like this don't necessarily surprise me so much because so I grew up watching like investigation or investigative discovery, the IT network, whatever that stands for. And I was always drawn to the episodes or the shows like specifically for what's it called? Like Women Who Kill or something like that. And so this kind of a case like totally fits that classification because from what we know about Jean, she was a good woman. She loved her children very much and she loved her longtime partner very deeply. But when people feel rejected, when people feel like they don't matter, when they are treated so poorly in these relationships, something can really change. A switch can flip and they become these people that we never expect. And it kind of begs the question, like, is that in all of us? Or are some people like predisposed to being that way? I don't know, it's just like a food for thought thing for me, and it's so interesting. So I'm curious to hear what you thought about this case, and